over the next 5 or 10 year period, you will, at a practical level, see less investment. And the only way to make that whole is if the government then takes all that money and all of a sudden allocates it from their own coffers back into the economy. And we know that that's not going to happen well. Unfortunately, the setup is that, you're going to really impact entrepreneurship. And then I wonder to myself, what was the actual goal of this? You may not be thinking about the capital gains rate, but it's implicit in the returns that you're expecting for the risk and the time you're going to take. And, we've been trained to feel that rate. And if you double that rate from 20 to 40, I suspect that there's a lot of people whose risk tolerance changes and they're going to feel their after-tax gains differently. And they'll wonder to themselves, is this worth it? And then I think what happens as a result is entrepreneurship drags. I don't know if anybody's done an analysis, but I suspect part of the reason why America is such an amazing sink for capital, right? It absorbs capital all around the world, is that you've created incentives that get people very excited because they think they can get rewarded. If you take those rewards away, I think the implications are much bigger than just the cap gains rates here. Because as the people change their behavior, then the capital formation pools outside of the United States change their behavior. And the whole thing has a knock-on effect. And it was more muted in Clinton. It was less muted in 78. It basically didn't exist in the 40s and 50s, but it is a huge force today. I mean, we are an indebted nation that owes money to all kinds of countries around the world, including China. We're supposed to generate growth and sort of pay it back. So when you think about for example, you would say, okay, who are the folks that we're talking about? There can be entrepreneurs that are building companies. Again, they're never selling, so they're never going to pay these taxes. It's not the case that Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg is all of a sudden going to write a $40 billion check, because that's not how much they make. That may be how much they're worth, right? But they will never sell a single share unless they have to fund some other project. And then you look at somebody else, maybe you say, oh, well, the people that manage money, let's go after those guys because those guys shouldn't be, rich. But then the problem is those guys are already paying W-2 income. They're already paying nominal income tax rates. That's how the entire hedge fund industry works right now. You get paid in current income. And so, okay, so you're not getting their money because they're already paying at the prevailing rate. So again, this goes back to, if you actually trace the problem and see who it affects, it's these folks that are in the middle that are actually putting the money to work, that are trying to invest in things that now have a very different return profile. And you're right, the core business that they do, they may still keep doing, but then all of the incremental things in the future that they want to do, they won't do. For example, look at all of the talk right now about how everybody needs to stand up, more angel investing, more minority investing, more women GPs, all of this stuff. Well, all of the folks, let's just be honest, all the folks that were in a position to put money into those folks are now 50% on a dollar rated basis poorer if this thing passes. And I bet you what they're going to do is they're not going to cut their allocations in Sequoia. They're going to cut their allocations to all these other folks. I'm telling you, I know it doesn't seem likely, but I think on a marginal basis, this will be an incentive to spend. And the reason is that it's a very frustrating idea for somebody to think about putting money in the ground, especially a sophisticated investor, at a rate of return that just changed in half. And so from my perspective, I would be more likely to spend because I would rather just YOLO the money than I would rather put it into the ground, because I would be worried that could then get taken away from me. It could also change even further and further. And I think that's a very frustrating idea. I'd rather take a vacation. Again, let's go back to the example. I'd rather take a vacation with that $10,000 than go on to Jason's syndicate and put it into the hands of folks, because I'm just like, you know what? It's going to turn into, even if Jason hits it and I get back, I'd rather just go on vacation. Enough of those decisions. And I think you have a very different kind of economy. You have, what you have? You have what everybody else has. I think you have to reduce expenses. I think that we have an infrastructure that is not well accounted for. Meaning, if you're a company, you can go to a company like Tableau, you can go to a company like, pick your metrics company, and within, a few weeks and months of work, you can literally understand where all the dollars are, right? You can understand your business and you can figure out where money is being wasted and where it's not. In a government, that's impossible to do. Right? Because you have these laws, and these laws are artificial constructs that we construct. And those artificial constructs are influenced by money in and of itself. And so these dollar flows are impossible to map. So you don't know where it goes. So for example, the $700 billion budget in the Pentagon, does anybody have any idea what the ROI is on that? Or even a way to measure it? Like, even to actually make it simple. If you had $700 billion of investment capital, the market has a really simple way of saying, what's your ROIC? What's your return on invested capital? And you can say all kinds of fancy things. You can have all kinds of fancy projects or simple projects. But at the end of the day, what is measurable is a dollar in and what that dollar grew into. And that's a return on invested capital. It is impossible to know that. And so, we could say, for example, you could define it and say, well, I'm going to basically get every single person to graduate high school. And now I'm going to spend $500 billion a year to make sure that the graduation rate is 100%. That would be an incredible goal. You know what? That is absolutely measurable. Think about this. What happens in a world where now, let's just say that the revenue of the government goes up, right? But outcomes stay the same or get worse. And at the same time, and you could claim that that's effectively what's been happening over the last 20 or 30 years, right? Government revenues have gone up, impact has stayed the same or probably been net negative. But then at the same time, you have this, program of quantitative easing where then you can essentially print money on demand. And when you think about that, it's like, wait a minute, I am giving you money, but then you are also going to the photocopy machine with my money to make more money. And all of that total money does less than what it did when it was half that or a quarter or a third of it. That's a very scary realization, I think, that people, will eventually come to. This is the other problem with like this idea of American exceptionalism. We believe that we can't learn anything from anybody else, and that's also not true. We actually know what it looks like when you have government as a massive portion of the economy. And we also know examples where government basically enables human capital outcomes, but remains relatively, small and fixed. Singapore, there's this incredible example where I think right when Lee Kuan Yew became the head of Singapore, the GDP of Singapore was the same as the GDP of Jamaica, right? And what you saw was this complete, just complete divergence in these two countries. And think about this country, which is basically this this little spot of land surrounded, apolitical, a-religious, surrounded by these Muslim countries, and they still thrived and they kicked ass. They were never invaded, et cetera, et cetera. And underneath that was this belief where you focus on an outcome, you spend against the outcome, and you try to measure in a reasonable way, and you double down on the things that work. And then on the other hand, if you look at Europe is a good example when, spending sometimes for the greater good in the best interest can run amok. And really what happens is you start to stagnate.